Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jenny and I will be chairing today's presentation. If you have any technical issues, please write them in the chat box at the bottom left of your screen and I'd be happy to assist you. Please note this webinar is being recorded and a copy will be sent to you. And I would like to now welcome our presenter, Kyler Crawford. Kyler is the Employer Development Manager for Dalhousie Science, Information Technology and Engineering Cooperative Education Department. Before joining Dow, he spent 8 years in an assortment of roles in the human capital field with a significant focus on business development. Most notably, Kyler is also known as a silver medal chili cook-off winner, so stick around if you want to ask him about this recipe. And I will now hand it over to Kyler.
Thanks, Jenny. And welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a busy time of year with the wrap-up of development for the summer term and the kickoff of fall. So thank you all for taking some time. Hope to make this as tight as possible. Goal here is not to cover every single aspect of employer development. Rather, it's to give you a simple framework that you can apply to track your progress, identify the key actions each step of the way, and hopefully make you more effective at each step. Those of you who've seen variations of this presentation before, maybe in Moncton at CAFKE National Conference 2016, maybe at Better Together last year in Vancouver, you'll recognize a lot of this. A few things have been refined, maybe tweaked a little bit, but again, this is not meant to be a full exhaustive exploration of every tactic at every stage. If anyone would like to get to that depth, I'll provide my information at the end and always happy to chat about this stuff. As we go, feel free to ask questions using the chat box. Jenny will manage those and pass them my way. I'll probably save most of them to the end, but I will be checking between each stage to see if there's anything that is a little bit more immediate we can address. So if there's anything not quite clear, throw it out there and we'll make sure to get to it. So without further ado, let's get started on the basics of employer development. So first of all, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about a concept called consultative selling. Now this might be familiar to some of you. For others it might be a bit new. It is a bit of a buzzword if you spend time in this field, but it's also key to productive meetings. Really for us it's the key to more jobs, and most definitely it's a gateway to better relationships with your employers. So we'll explore consultative selling. We're also going to talk a bit about why we want to follow a process. You may look and say, hey, I know my program, I know my students, why do I need a process to complicate things? Well, having a process is actually going to go a long way to simplifying your world, especially if employer development is only a small part of it. And it'll also make you more effective at each step. Then we'll talk after that about some of the stages, break the process down into 6 steps, each of which is going to have certain activities associated with it and certain desired outcomes. And then we'll wrap up and get to any questions that we haven't been able to address. So starting off, what is consultative selling? So consultative selling is, in short, the opposite of what a lot of people think of when they think of a salesperson. A lot of people hear sales. Sales is a 4-letter word, but it's not a bad word. But still, a lot of people think of sales as the pushy used car salesman. So consultative selling is kind of the opposite of that. We got to be consultants to our prospects, and that means working with them to understand their world, understand their needs, and address them through the product or service that we're offering, in this case, co-op or will. So a fundamental tenet of consultative selling, and this is really important to remember, this is really what underpins everything, is that people take action in order to meet an unmet need. So there's something in your life that's either causing you pain or it's not as good as it could be, and you want to address that. So the easiest example is you're hungry. You've got a need for food. You've got a need for nourishment, for energy that's going unmet. So you take action by buying a sandwich. Once you've taken that action, your need is met, and your world's a little bit better. So the goal of someone in a sales role, which in this context we all are, is to inspire the person you're selling to take action. In order to take action, the person you're speaking with must believe that the action you want them to take will help to meet an unmet need. So the consultative selling approach allows us to uncover those needs and position what we're offering as the solution to meeting those needs. And at the end of the day, we don't make anyone post a job. We don't make anyone hire a student. They choose to do that. It's our job to help them see why they should want to do that. Quick example of the consultative approach and the difference between it and a typical sales approach is, imagine you're buying a bicycle. You go into Bob's bike shop. Fellow walks up to you, you say, "I'd like to buy a bicycle." He takes you over to see the latest, greatest bicycle that the Tour de France winner rode. It's got aircraft-grade alloys. It's as light as a feather. It also costs as much as your car. You were looking for, something maybe about $500 to help you get to work. Now this person's telling you about this product. It's a great product, but it's not what you need. This person didn't care at all about your needs, didn't take the time to understand what you wanted, and therefore is wasting your time, and you're probably not even going to bother redirecting him. You're probably going to go down the road and hopefully find someone who pays a little more attention to what you want. So if you ask the right questions, if you do a little bit of research to inform those questions, and you really listen to your prospect, you're going to end up addressing their needs, adding value, and building strong partnerships with them. On to the process. Why do we want to follow a process? Quite simply, it gives you a roadmap to get from where you are to your goal. It gives some structure as well to the whole endeavor of employer development. It allows you to measure the inputs and see how they relate to the outputs. We'll talk a bit more about that a little later on. It also helps with planning and forecasting. Planning and forecasting, doubly important when resources are scarce. We don't all have a ton of time to do this, so we need to make sure that the time we spend is used as efficiently as possible. So, for example, if you work with economics students, let's say, for the fall term, you have 5 economics students who are counting on you to develop jobs for them. If that's me, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about how many prospects am I going to have to contact in order to find one who's interested in talking to me? How many of those interested prospects am I going to have to talk to find one who's a good fit as a co-op employer? And how many good fits do I have to talk to find someone who wants to hire a student for the fall? As you go, as you track, as you adhere to this process and get some metrics from it, you're going to better be able to predict where you need to spend your time. It also helps identify areas for improvement. We'll talk about stages of the process here in a minute, and you'll notice if you follow and you track, you might see your opportunities starting to go a little bit south at a given stage. Now, if you know where it's falling apart, then you can tell what's happening or what's not happening, and what can you do to change that. Finally, a process helps you make your meetings more productive. If you know what you want, you know what information you need, you know what your goal is, you're going to do a better job of staying on track. And employers who generally have limited time, they appreciate dealing with someone who's on point, who knows what they want, and who's pretty clear about how the meeting needs to run and what they need to do in order to address the prospect's needs. Getting students hired, for a lot of us, it's our world. For the employers, it's a tiny, tiny part. So the easier we can make it for them to get us the information we need, the more enjoyable a process it will be for them. So now moving on, let's introduce the process itself. So these are the 6 stages of the employer development process. Those of you who are in Vancouver, you might remember 7. What we've done here, just for simplicity and because I think it makes sense conceptually, is we've combined what would have been stage 3 and 4 into stage 3. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get there. So which stages are we looking at here? First of all, it's planning. Planning is kind of a double-barrel stage because you need to plan right at the very, very beginning before you even think of picking up the phone. But then you'll also have to plan before an actual meeting or an actual call. So think of planning as actually sort of bracketing that second stage, prospecting. The prospecting stage is where we identify who should we be talking to, who are the right organizations, who are the right contacts. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how we find those contacts, how we identify those organizations, and how we make sure that we're spending our time in the right places. The discovery and needs assessment stage. This is where we continue to identify the correct contact, learn about them, learn about their world, learn about their needs, and identify needs that we can meet through co-op or will. After the needs assessment, we connect the dots with the value proposition. This is where we actually get to sell. We get to talk about how great we are and help the employers understand how what we're offering can help to address their needs. Sorry, I've got a couple hands raised here. Okay, looks like we're doing all right. Anita, if you still have issues, just toss your hand up again. We're not progressing the slides yet. I'm just reviewing the process, and then we'll get a little bit more in depth. After value proposition, we come to objection handling. This is where we make sure that all the value that we've demonstrated or we think we've demonstrated has been heard by the employer. And if there are any objections, if there's anything deficient, this is where we address it. And then finally, closing, which is really just identifying what the next actions are, establishing timelines, making sure that we don't lose the momentum we've generated. So the first stage, planning. Planning is where we identify, starting off, what's our value proposition? So essentially, why would someone want what we're offering? So there are a few different angles to look at this from. First of all, I'll take CWIL's established benefits of co-op. So this is found on the website, and these are pretty standard. You should know these if you don't already, like the back of your hand, because they'll form the foundation of just about any value proposition you make. You got skilled employees to meet temporary staffing needs and do it cost effectively. It can be hard to find an engineer in training or a junior engineer for a 4-month term, but a third work term or final work term engineering co-op student could do a lot of the same things, but with much more flexible employment terms. Employers can reduce recruiting costs, build their talent pipeline. I call co-op the world's greatest job interview. You get to see someone work for 4 months and see if they fit and can help you do what you need to do. Co-op can bring new ideas, new energy, and just a sense of freshness to their teams, especially organizations where they don't have a lot of turnover. Getting that, that constant throughput of co-op students can bring some new thinking along. Helps employers build connections on campus, help them connect with researchers, all the various other interesting things going on, help to improve their brand recognition, which helps with recruiting, of course, and in the end, develop their profession's next generation. When you're talking to engineers, when you're talking to accountants, folks who have a designation, but also other folks, they're going to be interested in many cases in helping out the next generation because they remember how hard it was to break in. So all of those form what you call like the generic benefits of co-op. Next, you need to understand your school's value proposition. So why would someone want to recruit from your school? Do you offer specialized programs, maybe that other schools don't have, or that are offering your students knowledge that's not found out in the broader workforce? Do you have unique courses? Do you have research specialties? Do your professors have research specialties? Are there research chairs that are giving students deeper access to a particular area? Do you have a particularly diverse student body? Maybe you've got folks from all corners of the globe, folks who can work in multiple languages, students who have cultural understanding that can help a business maybe that's doing business locally take the next step and go global. Or maybe you're in an advantageous location. Maybe your school's located somewhere where you're really the only co-op program. Or maybe you recruit from a particular area where your students want to return to. So you can also leverage that. So those are just a few, but it really does pay to understand, why would someone want to recruit from your school? So once you've established this, you understand what do you offer, who would want to recruit from you, what's your value proposition, then you'd move on to prospecting. So we'll jump to that in just a second, but also involved in planning because planning and prospecting are not necessarily sequential. You notice that with a lot of these steps. It's not necessarily 1, then 2, then 3. Many of them will be happening in parallel. So when you are finally ready for the call, you want to get yourself organized and make sure you know Know this before you pick up the phone. Know this before you go into the meeting. Who are you calling? What do they do? What do they care about? So what factors affect their industry? You can find this online. What's their history with your co-op program? What's their history with other co-op programs? Do you have any success stories in their industry that might demonstrate your program's value? Know why someone would hire. Know your school's value proposition. Know the benefits of co-op. And know who your competition is. Now, competition is not just other schools offering co-op, though it can be that. It could also be, generic summer student hiring. If you're dealing with the federal government, maybe it's FSWEP, a manager who either is going to go to that talent pool or who is, going to post directly with your school. So why would someone want to work with you and your school and your students over all the other options that are available? In order to correctly articulate that, you want to know what the other options are. And then heading into the meeting, once again, you want to make sure that you've got a pretty clear agenda for yourself. What's your objective? Do you want a job posting? Are you just trying to gather business intelligence and get the lay of the land? Are you trying to find out who the decision maker is? Who would be the person who would make the decision to hire a co-op student? Or maybe you're trying to get a referral. Maybe you're talking to someone that you know is not going to hire a student, but they're an alum of your school, and you think they might be able to help you get to someone who can. So once you're clear on that, you can set yourself an agenda. Outline what you want to talk about. Outline the information you want to get. And if it's a set call, don't be afraid to share this with the employer. It'll demonstrate your professionalism. It'll make your program look good because you're obviously respectful of their time if you're planning your call before you even get there. And it helps to keep everyone on track. So even if you don't share it, do it for yourself. I rarely ever get on a call with an employer without taking 30 seconds and jotting down, okay, here's what I need from them. Here's what I want to make sure they understand from me. And here are the desired outcomes before we can hang up the phone. But again, stepping backwards a little bit, before we get into pre-call planning, we do need to prospect. So what is prospecting? Prospecting is identifying the right organization and the right contact. To get jobs, you need employers. To find employers, you need people to call. So here we're going to talk about who do you call, how many leads do you need to be effective, as well as a little bit on how to prioritize. So prospecting is the process of identifying and qualifying potential employers. So it includes everything from reading the news and seeing what's out there, making a list of folks you want to call, to the actual process of calling into organizations, understanding them, and working your way to the decision maker. Now, prospects, in addition to being individuals, are also metrics. And they're the first metric and arguably one of the most important metrics in the employer development process. So how many prospects do you need? Well, that depends. And I'm generally afraid of math, but I think I've put together a few little equations here that can be useful as sort of your fundamental planning equations. So if you write one thing down, write these down. So first off, we want to get prospects per job posting. So how many prospects did we start with? How many job postings did we end with? Job postings per hire. How many jobs did we post? How many divided by how many students were hired? So once you have those two, you can get a little bit more involved. Take the number of students that you need to develop for, multiply by the postings per hire. So if you need to post 3 jobs to get a student hired, you have 5 students to be hired, you need 15 jobs. So then you subtract the number of expected postings. So how many postings from your old reliable employers that post every term do you expect? Take those away. And the remainder, that's how many postings do you need. Take how many postings you need, multiply it by how many prospects do you need per job posting. So how many prospects does it take to get a posting? And that's going to tell you how many prospects you need. So that's a pretty simple equation. And at the end of the day, what that'll tell you is, I need in each of my 5 programs, I need 50 prospects, let's say. Or maybe in one program, I need 50. In another program, for the same number of students, I might need 30 because those students tend to do better when we post jobs for any number of reasons. So figuring that out, that's going to get you oriented, and it's going to help you to plan your term, which again, is important if you're dealing with limited resources. And generally prospecting is discussed in reference to new employers. We'll generally talk about it here in terms of new business, but these principles still apply to existing employers as well. If you're calling someone back term after term, it might be someone who's posted once, maybe they posted 2 or 3 terms ago. They're not fully on your team yet. So some of these same principles can be applied. They can also be applied in large organizations where maybe you have a pocket of 2 or 3 who hire from you, but there are 15 other folks who don't. So you can use a lot of the same things, same ideas, just tweak them a bit as appropriate. So where do we find leads? Where do we find prospects? We have a lot of options. The first one I just mentioned, referrals. So ask your existing employers who works next to them. Who did they work with in their last job? Who do they know that would benefit from co-op or will? Ask your faculty. They often have industry connections you can take advantage of. If you've got faculty advisors attached to your program, so much the better. They're already involved. Really, referrals can come from quite literally anybody. So be active in your industries, be active in the fields where your students work, and your goal is just to be out there and to make sure that if somebody out there mentions co-op, your school's name or maybe your name is going to follow it. And that comes with just being out there, being connected, and in the end, you want to generate passive referrals. And those are referrals where you didn't do any work, you didn't call anyone, you got a call out of the blue, and so-and-so told me to call you because they say you can help me out with co-op students. So that's the eventual goal, and it takes time, but it can be very productive when you get to that state. Next, your institution. Who funds research on campus? Who's sponsoring events like case competitions or hackathons? Who's donating to capital projects? Who's putting the name on the new dorm? Who's putting their name on the new auditorium? In order to do this and really save some time, you want to make sure that you get to know your school's other industry-facing units. For example, here at Dow, we have several groups involved in co-op and will. We all share information. We're in regular contact. We also have a team that oversees research partnerships between faculty and industry. We have a very active development team that does major gift fundraising. And we have an alumni office that engages with Dow alumni. So those are all groups that can potentially provide leads. Sticking on the topic of alumni for a minute, you've got your program's alumni, first of all. Smaller programs, you might have very good relationships with them as a matter of course, so make sure you take advantage of them. There are also local alumni chapters. I know if I'm going to Calgary to do some employer development, the first thing I want to do is talk to the president of the local alumni chapter, see if there are any former co-op students or even just former students from our programs out there that we can take advantage of their connections and get maybe a warm introduction. This is where LinkedIn comes in handy. Really, it's a living directory. Connect with your alumni, keep in touch with them. What you're going to see, hopefully, is a couple years down the road, you find a student who's been hired by the company that you're trying to break into, and all of a sudden, you've got a friendly face on the inside. You also have a number of third-party events that you can attend. Now, a third party, I mean, something the Chamber of Commerce is putting on, something that an industry body is putting on. You can also have a partner and hold your own. Do a lunch and learn, do some sort of networking event for a particular program. I mentioned Engineers Nova Scotia here. They're a partner of ours. We're working with them on getting into their lunch and learn series. They have a mandate to provide professional development. We have a mandate to get co-op students hired. Why not put something on jointly, bring their membership in, and have them learn how they can enable their business with co-op students? We've got general marketing as well. That's pretty broad, but first off, if you can get yourself some earned media, this might take a communications person, but if you have good relationships, say with your journalism program, you might be able to get something out of that. You want to find a compelling co-op story, tell it to whoever will listen. Will's gaining profile nationally, and news outlets want to start talking about the thing that the federal government just committed $73 million to. So the potential's there. You can get online and print advertising, social media obviously, and industry associations. As I mentioned, like Engineers Nova Scotia. They generally have a mandate around some form of workforce development, so it's in their interest to promote co-op. Now, if you're doing any kind of online marketing, make sure you're capturing leads. This applies to other forms as well, but particularly with online. Make sure your message has a clear call to action. Call this person, email this person, go to this website, fill out this form. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you can capture someone's interest even if they maybe don't want to hire right now. Because typically people will see that ad, people will pick up the phone if they have a need. If they don't have a need but they think it's a great idea, they'll say, "Oh, that's a good idea. I'll get to that." And maybe they will, maybe they won't. You don't want to leave it up to them. So capturing that lead is very important. And finally, general data mining and market research. You can get your formerly active employers, get your top employers' biggest competitors. If you work with the biggest engineering firm in town, what is the second and third biggest? What do they do? Are they working in similar fields? Is there some way that you can take advantage of the work you've done with number one to demonstrate your value to number two and three? Read trade publications, read the news. Bang for your buck. I don't think I've ever found anything better than just reading CBC News every morning with my coffee. It tells me what's going on in industry. The business section is really your friend because who's buying who's won a project, who's building a new development center. All those things, they'll often make the news either on a broader scale or in one of those trade publications. So keep an eye out. So now moving on to the needs assessment. This is where we've identified the right prospect and we know our value in a general sense. So it's time to discover a little bit more about the prospect you're speaking with and understand where they have needs that you can address. So first of all, what are we trying to do, really? We want to understand their organization and industry. We want to identify decision makers and their decision-making process. We want to let people talk about themselves because people like talking about themselves. People like talking about their business. We want to take advantage of that so we can learn more about them. And really, we want to do this because selling's not telling. We don't want to sit there and talk about how great we are. We want to understand our prospects' world, and then we want to demonstrate value for them. So questions that you can ask, and these are very general, but these are kind of good go-to questions. Discovery questions. Tell me about your company. How big are you? How many locations do you have? What do you do? What industries do you operate in? How's your company organized? What does each group within the company do? What are your priorities? What are your priorities right now? What are they for the next year, the next 3 years? This will give you a good idea into what their staffing needs might be. What's your business cycle like? Is it cyclical? Are you busier in the summer? Are there peaks and valleys around projects? All those things really point toward a case where a company might have to add talent on a temporary basis. Great case for co-op students. Then once you've got that lay of the land, you can drill down a little more into understanding their actual talent needs. So here's where you start asking specific questions around recruitment. This is really getting into trying to uncover things that you can address with your co-op value proposition. How are you attracting talent? Do you even know what co-op is? Do you hire co-op students already? This is going to tell you when you start actually selling, when we get to the next stage, are you going to have to start from scratch with what is co-op? Or do they already know what it is, and this is more about how to get them to add you, to the list of schools they work with? So which schools do they work with? Why is it they choose to work with them? Is it specific programs? Is it an alumni relationship? Is it geographic proximity? Understanding that's going to help you understand where you fit in relation to your competition. Now these here are probably, my top questions. Throw me in a desert island, you can only take 5 discovery questions with you. I prefer the idea of 5 albums, but if I had to take discovery questions, these would be the 5. Tell me about your recruitment process. What talent do you find most challenging to hire? If you hire grads, how do you ensure you're getting the best new grad talent? How do you promote your organization as an employer of choice, both to students and graduates, but also out there in the job market at large? Because even if you don't hire those co-op students immediately after graduation, what do you want to bet they're working in your field around your town? And if they've had a good experience with you, that will help you out down the road. And how do they staff their team to deal with fluctuating demand, vacations, that sort of thing, expected or unexpected absences where they need to staff up and get some horsepower on a project. So once you've asked these questions, and really whichever other ones you think are appropriate, I really think it's important to keep, almost a playbook of questions, develop it as you go, and then, deploy them as appropriate. Once you've used them and gathered enough information, now we move on to the value proposition. So this is where we sell. This is where we demonstrate how co-op and will can address the needs of your prospect. So starting off, what we're trying to do is, again, use the information uncovered during the needs assessment, show them how co-op and will benefits their organization. So the first thing you're going to do, summarize what you've gathered. And this is where we use active listening principles. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. So we want to reflect back to the prospect, this is what we heard. This is what you said, this is what I understand. Is this true? Let's make sure we're on the same page. Make sure that the needs that I think I've uncovered actually exist. So now you take, and once you've identified those needs, you show them how co-op or will can address each relevant need. And as you go, you check for understanding. So they identify a need. They're having issues attracting talent. So it sounds to me like you have challenges, getting young talent onto your team so that you can develop it because the job market is very competitive. Is that correct? Yes. Great. All right. Well, what about if you were able to get at these students before they hit the new grad job market? What if you were able to start building relationships with them, in their third and fourth, early in their fourth year, so that when they do graduate, you've got the inside track on bringing them into your organization? Great. Now, do you see how that would work? You understand how co-op functions as the world's greatest job interview? That would just be one quick example, but there's a need. Here's how co-op addresses it, and let's make sure we're all on the same page. You do kind of want to make sure that your value proposition is a bit distinct. And when I say that, I mean you want to make sure that when you're talking to employers, you don't disrupt your needs assessment by jumping up and starting to talk about how great you are. There might be times where you can mention things and position value as you're learning, but you want to really keep the focus on them during needs assessment. And then in the value proposition, the focus is still on them, but it's on what you can do for them. Right? It's really, really tempting, especially when we see that we've got a good prospect and we're hearing what we want to hear, to start talking too soon. But you've got 2 ears and you've got 1 mouth, and that's about the appropriate ratio during most sales calls. Do twice as much listening as you do talking, because if you're talking, you're not learning anything. And you might discover during the needs assessment that your decision maker is another person. Right? You might be talking to a manager, and the manager tells you all about the organization, all about their project, all about how they can use co-op students. When the time comes, you find out the manager doesn't make the call, the director does. That's fine. Just means you need to take this and parlay it into a meeting with the decision maker, but you're going to be much better equipped for that meeting because you've already done so much discovery. So let's say you are talking to the decision maker. You deliver a great value proposition. What's next? You're going to close the deal, right? Well, you'd hope so, but chances are you'll have to handle an objection or two. So now, no matter how well you execute, you might still have to run into objections. So objections are actually a good thing. Now, they're not great in that they mean that you haven't yet demonstrated enough value for your prospect to act. But an objection is 100 times better than, oh, that's cool, I'll think about it and give you a call, right? Because I don't know about you, but in my experience, people who say they'll think about it and give me a call rarely give me a call, and I'm willing to bet they don't really think about it either. So an objection means that someone's engaged with what you're saying. It means that they're thinking about what you're telling them, and they've identified some reasons they don't think it's for them, but at least they're thinking about it, which means if you can get those reasons, then you can do something about it. So what do you do when you uncover an objection? First of all, you're going to listen, acknowledge, and clarify. A lot of people, when you start talking about sales, their fear is being too pushy. You want to look pushy? Best way to do it is to just bluster through objections. So first thing, once you listen, you need to acknowledge. Repeat it back to them. I understand your objection. I understand your concern. Is what I'm hearing correct? Are you concerned that you won't have the resources to supervise a co-op student? Okay, good. So you think that? I understand that. We're on the same page. Now, you want to dig in a little bit because the stated objection might not be the real one. This is kind of like talking about symptoms versus the underlying cause. So someone says, I don't have the objection to supervise a co-op student. Now you want to move in, once you understand it, to addressing objections. So you might want to reiterate the benefit you're talking about in a different way because maybe they didn't hear you. They didn't catch what you were saying the first time around. You might want to provide additional information. So maybe there's something you can provide to fill a gap in their understanding, or maybe you'd propose a different solution. So going back to the example of I don't have time and resources to supervise a co-op student, maybe they think that co-op students need to be babysat every step of the way. Maybe they don't know that with appropriate onboarding and ramp up, co-op students can become quite productive in a very short period of time in many cases. Maybe they need additional information. Maybe they don't understand what students can do. We work with computer science students, and we find this often. Employers won't know just what students study and what they're capable of doing. So you might have to go back and get this additional information. Nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that you identify that if this is the objection and I get you this information, are we going to be able to move ahead? Or maybe neither of those is really applicable. Maybe they just really don't have the resource. They need someone they can drop in and get working almost right away, as in give them the book, give them a laptop, get to work. So here, what I would do in my case is I'd propose a different solution. Maybe an undergrad co-op student is not for them, but one of our Masters of Applied Computer Science students might be able to fit the bill. So it's going to be different depending on what your programs are and what your options are, but those three approaches are kind of three generic ways to deal with most objections. So once you've done that, now you want to obtain agreement and move forward. So do you think you've done a good job of addressing the objection? You probably do. Make sure they agree. And you can do that simply, again, by checking for understanding. You've identified this issue. Here's a way I think you get around it. What do you think of that? And then from there, deal's closed. Everyone goes home happy. Most cases, hopefully all cases, but realistically, we're not going to win them all. There are going to be some objections we can't overcome. And that's fine, right? Because we need more prospects than we need jobs, because not everyone's going to work. But if you review what you've done, particularly the ones you've lost, you're still going to learn from them. And there's no losing if you learn. So especially in the beginning as you're practicing these skills, there are going to be times where you look back and go, I could have done something differently. And that's fine. Just make sure you identify it. Make sure you do it differently the next time. So that leads us into closing. And that does mean we're getting toward the end. But closing is an important step, making sure that you don't lose the momentum that you've generated during your call. So what are you trying to do when you get to the closing stage? Don't be afraid to ask what you want. You probably called the meeting. It's your meeting. It's up to you to set the tone. Ask for what you want. Can we go ahead with the job posting? Sounds like we need to meet with your boss. Can you set up a meeting for me with your boss? Don't be afraid to ask. And this is a great way to uncover objections, because if you ask for something and they're hesitant, that means there's an objection. You can dig a little bit deeper. Whatever the outcome, whether it's a job posting or a continuation, you want to identify next actions for you and your employer. So you might want to summarize with a follow-up email. For example, I'll get you info on our sequences and the thermodynamics course that our engineering students take by Friday. And when we meet next Friday, are you going to be able to talk to your boss before then and find out what your budget is and how many students you might be able to hire? Does that sound good? Did I miss anything? Great. These are our commitments, and we're both going to have these done. The more you lay it out, without being too prescriptive, but the more you reiterate and make clear what each of you is doing, the better chance you're going to have of, one, you remembering what you need to do, and two, them remembering what they need to do for you. And that's similar to the next one. Never leave things, jumped ahead, getting a little too excited. Never leave things open-ended. If it took you a month of chasing someone to get a meeting with them, do you think if you leave it open-ended, you're not going to run into the same issue? Someone's busy, so you want to try to set the next meeting. If you can set it right there, hey, 2 months from now, Friday afternoon, let's get together for coffee. That's great. Send them a calendar invite, lock it in. It might get moved, but at least you put a stick in the ground. Maybe it's a continuation for next term where you say, yeah, I'm not going to hire for summer, but I might want to talk about it for fall. Okay, when are you going to be ready to talk about it for fall? Probably mid-July, let's say. Okay, great. So I'll send you an invite for July 15th. We'll get together, and we can move it if we get closer, but that way, again, you're putting something in the ground, and you're making sure that you're not going to lose momentum, or you're minimizing your chances of losing momentum that you've generated during a good meeting. And finally, if it's appropriate, ask for referrals. Ask them to bring a colleague to the next meeting. Ask who else in their organization you should be talking to. If you've done a good job, if you've created value, they're going to want to share it. We want to help our colleagues out. We want to give them access to good experiences which we've had. Any of you guys ever come to Halifax, drop me a line. I'll tell you all about my favorite restaurants. Right? And because they gave me good service, they gave me a good experience, I want to give them business, and give the people that I know, people I have relationships with, a chance to have a good experience too. So remember, this process, again, is not always linear. Really, a better way to conceptualize this might be a Gantt chart. And when I do version 4, maybe that's what I'll do. But it's a process, but it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, done. You might start stage 1, you're planning. You start to prospect. You're talking to prospects. You're not getting anywhere. Maybe you need to go back and think about planning and think about, is my value proposition really what I think it is? You do a needs assessment. You move on to the value proposition. You're saying things, your prospect's nodding, but you get the feeling nothing's really landing with them. You might have to go back and do a little bit more discovery before you really identify the need that they need to address. And by the same token, if your process is stalling, ask yourself, is there info that I've missed? Are they seeing the value? Am I talking to the right person? This is something my team and I run into a lot when we're dealing with human resources folks. Now, human resources can be a great partner when it comes to co-op, but they don't always have the same needs and the same sort of pain that, say, a development manager or an R&D manager would have. So talking about how great and how skilled your students are and how quickly they get up to speed, that's really going to resonate with someone who's going to be managing that student. Human resources, once they hire the student, they might not see them. So with them, their needs might look more like, I want to have a professional co-op office that gets me resumes in a timely manner, that's easy to deal with, that makes it simple for me to post jobs. They might have, again, completely different needs. So you might have to sell both of them. You might have to deal with the manager on one side because they're going to initiate the requirement, and you might have to deal with human resources in order to make sure that your school is on the list to get the job. So, all that to say, it's not, no two interactions are really ever going to look the same. So, keep an open mind and always be thinking about what else can I be doing. There are a couple more general tips, really more touching on other topics for further study, but it's very important to track progress. First and foremost, you want to have some sort of customer relationship management tool. Now, that's a big buzzword, but that can mean anything from enterprise software to an Excel spreadsheet. Right? If it's just writing down, recording your employers in a spreadsheet, recording what stage you're at, recording what your next action is, that'll go a long way to keeping you on track, especially if you're someone who maybe Monday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Thursday all day, you do employer development, and the rest of your time is spent with program stuff and student meetings. You want to make sure that when you sit down, you can pick up just from where you left off. And that's also going to be a great way to start generating metrics, predict your future, and start supporting analysis. Practice, 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 practice. Can't stress that enough. Role play with your colleagues. Rehearse things like your cold call scripts and your elevator pitches. These are things that you want to be able to deliver a lot of information in a short period of time. You get somebody on the phone, they're running between meetings. You've got at most 30 seconds to tell them who you are, why you're calling, how you got their number, and what's in it for them if they keep listening to you. So you want to make sure that you're tight, you're clear, and you're confident. And a good way to test that is leave yourself a voicemail. I used to do that a few jobs ago. Driving into work every day, I'd call myself, leave myself a voicemail. I knew no one would pick up because I was in the car with me. But I could get in, hear how I was sounding. How does my energy level sound? Do I sound excited? Do I sound like someone that you're going to want to call back? Or do I need to get my juices going a little bit before I jump on the phone? So it can be a little bit intimidating. Role playing can be intimidating too because we don't always like to put ourselves on display. But that and good, honest feedback from your peers, it goes a long way to perfecting your game. And that really feeds into the last one, which I don't think we need to tell anybody on the call about this. Never stop learning. You got to be a lifelong learner with this. What are the objections you encounter? How do you address them? Which ones tend to come up in certain industries? And what's your plan for getting around them in future? Who are your top employers? How do they utilize their students? Who are their competitors? How can you use this knowledge, these success stories, to generate more opportunities? Just always be paying attention to what you're doing. Always be thinking, and just be creative about how you can use that information to do a better job developing opportunities for your students and growing your program. So with that, we've come to the end. Before we move on to questions, I'd like to say thanks to a few people. Thank you to Charlene Marion. She kindly helped me with the graphics for this. Anyone who knows me knows my skills on PowerPoint, and you guys would be looking at black text on a white background exclusively if it wasn't for her. I'd like to thank Lucie Gendron, former CAFKE member. She's now moved on from the co-op world, but she was really instrumental in working with me getting the initial version of this content together. And I know she'll appreciate hearing this when we get her the recording. Thank Bruce, Steph, and the whole CWIL PD committee. Thank you guys very much for the opportunity. I love to talk about this stuff. I could probably do it all day. You can see we're getting to work question time, so if I don't stop myself, I might. And finally, once again, I want to thank all of you. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. Again, I know there's never enough hours in the day, and I appreciate that you've taken an hour out of your day to listen to what I have to say, and I really do hope that you've taken some value from it. So there's my contact info. If you have any questions about further resources, anything I've said, feel free to ask them here. But if you want to get a little bit deeper, feel free to get in touch with me offline. I always love to chat about this. So moving on to questions, I see we've got one. Rick has asked, with regard to finding prospects, can you speak to the use of SEO, SEM, content marketing, and drip campaigns? Rick, I can in very general terms. So I know that these specific approaches, and these, for those of you who aren't familiar, these are all online marketing tactics. They've proven to be effective in a number of industries, and we're really just starting to exploit them. So SEO, we haven't done a ton, and part of the reason we're just starting is we've had a bit of turnover on the communication side. We've recently hired an excellent communications officer. She's got a great background both in higher ed and in the private sector, so she really knows the full gamut of what's possible. So we've found that content marketing is very effective, particularly in our email campaigns, because getting emails that say, hi, hire a co-op student, hi, hire a co-op student, rank and match is coming up. Hey, rank and match is over. You can still hire a co-op student. That just gets lost in the noise after a while. But as soon as we started generating more original content and including that, our click-through rates went up, our open rates went up dramatically, and our overall level of engagement really increased. And as far as drip marketing, we have not tried that. We do have an inbound marketing tool that enables that. I think that's going to be the next step with us as far as content marketing. But I do think there's a lot of potential with what we do for drip marketing. And drip marketing, for those who aren't familiar, is if you've ever signed up to download so-and-so's white paper, and then all of a sudden you get on their email list, that's a form of drip marketing. Putting content out to them, making sure they stay engaged, and just basically keeping them warm until they're ready to take action. As you probably know, talking to someone who wants to hire co-op and someone who's prepared to hire co-op, there can be a couple years between those two things. So, Rick, I don't know if that's answered your question, but overall, I think they're all good approaches. They're going to depend on each individual office's resources, and both financial and knowledge-wise, and just your ability to execute it. Down the list. Let's see. Deborah has asked, what are your recommended forms of communication throughout the 5 stages? Believe it or not, I don't really have any recommended forms of communication. I think in the initial stages, you're essentially testing to see how someone wants to engage. So when I'm first trying to get a hold of someone, I'm trying to get them on the phone. I'm not leaving voicemails. I'm trying to get a human on the other end. And I'm trying at different times of day. So I might call in the morning. I might call at night. If you're trying to get a hold of a director, it's not the worst idea in the world to come in at 7:30 in the morning and try to get a hold of them. Because if they're a real big shot, they're in meetings all day. So, when a couple jobs back, I was in a business development role with a lot of federal government clients. And my real decision makers, I could only get them before 8 or after 5 because they were booked in between there. So initially, I think you want to get a human on the line, use phone. If that's not effective, maybe send a well-crafted email and then follow up, kind of alternating, see what they get back to you on, and then use that. I think it also depends too, what's your story? Is it a warm lead? Do you have a compelling reason that, hey, such and such who used to work with you has suggested I contact you to talk about co-op? That will work in an email because they know, why is this happening? What's in it for me? If you're just coming in cold, email will often get lost in the noise. So I guess the summary of that answer is, try everything, find out what your prospect wants, and then go with that. Kate has asked, how many appointments do you have a week? What do you consider a successful year? So I think that's really going to vary for us. We do mostly inside sales, so meaning we're on the phones more than we are out in the community. That's partly because of our location. Half of our students are employed outside of Nova Scotia, so to call on everyone would be difficult. But the metric my team uses, we want to make 60 calls a week. And a call, for our purposes, could also mean a meaningful email interaction, getting back to the previous question about what's the right way to engage with people, however they want. Some people don't want to pick up the phone, but if you send them a clear, concise email, they'll get back to you within a few minutes. So I found if you're focusing solely on employer development and you're both doing new development and managing relationships, 60 calls, 15 calls a day, mixed in with site visits, mixed in with student issues, we found that to be a good recipe for success. Bruce has asked, people generally like to help people. I like to think they do. But what's the most common objection we get? The most common objection we hear is, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources. Right? So in order to address that, what we try to do is, really be clear on, the type of needs assessment that we're doing. Because if we really understand their business and they say they don't have the time, what I'm trying to do is come up with a scenario where they can fit that co-op student in with minimal interruption. So if someone says, for example, I don't have the time to get a student up to speed on my project, by the time they're ready to go, their 4 months is up, what I might suggest is if you can take and carve out a specific piece of that project or a specific ongoing project support piece where that is easy to pick up for a student, and you can transition one student out and another one in, then they're not going to be getting into the meat of your project, but they'll be doing something valuable to support it. For example, a lot of our employers, our engineering employers, who really they kind of have more of an approach where their engineers are project managers. So they'll use co-op students essentially as project coordinators and checkers. Now it's not super technical, but when you get to some of these very large projects, just managing that many suppliers, managing that many contractors, keeping up the relationships, tracking and making sure documentation is appropriate, that's a job in and of itself. So that's just an example of a way that a role can be crafted for a co-op student, for someone who maybe doesn't want to get them involved in the full project. So again, Bruce, to kind of bring that back, I think the most common objections again are, I'd like to, I don't have time, I don't have resources. So the better your needs assessment, the better you'll be able to do a bit of solutioning and come up with and propose ideas for how they might be able to get around that. Deborah, another question, thank you. Regarding follow-up through the stages, how do I determine timeframes? Well, typically, if we're starting from a prospect, we want to try to get five touches in before we give up. So we've tried to contact somebody 5 times. We've used a mix of phone, voicemail, and email. And if none of those work, maybe LinkedIn as well. If none of those work, then we're probably going to move on, try to find someone else in that organization because this person's not responsive. Someone calls you 5 times, you don't get back to them, you're probably not interested. And then time frames for follow-up once you're engaged, that really depends on the employer, right? And that's why asking, hey, what's an appropriate time frame? When should we be following up is important. All right. And I hope that was helpful, Deborah. If you'd like something else, feel free to pose another one. Valerie asks, in maintaining relationships with existing or newly developed employer partners, what appreciation activities do you run at Dalhousie? Is there anything unique that you do during worksite visits to leave employers feeling impressed by your customer service? That's an excellent question. And that's something I think we do well. I think we could do more of. In terms of activities, we do have quite a large event that we put on every March to coincide with Co-op Week. It's the Top Co-op Awards. We do it in conjunction with the Co-op and Career Office Management Career Services from our business school. And this is where we give awards to our top co-op students as chosen by staff and faculty, to our top supervisors as chosen by students, and to our top employers as chosen by staff. So that's the big award. And this year, winners got, they got the invite, they got a nice dinner, nice networking event, some nice earned media for their organization, got some awards, and they also got kind of something we tried, a little LinkedIn background, so almost a digital recognition piece. So that would be the big event. We do have other events on campus, which are our preferred employers, those that have proven to be good partners. We really do try to bring them in for networking, that sort of thing. During site visits, really I think we show appreciation to our employers by going in there, being on point, and conducting a really good, valuable site visit. I generally get feedback from our employers that our site visits are quite in-depth, and it's obviously we bring a lot of value to the students, and a lot of the time employers will appreciate some of the questions we ask too. So we have tried appreciation awards for students in the past. We might bring that back, but it was kind of a printed sheet that they would write the name on, and I think there's a better way to do that. So when we think of something really cool, let the group know. And other than that, we do have a standard assortment of trinkets, pens, mugs, folders, that sort of thing. And, for those valued employers, we might bring those around just as a little bit of a leave behind. All right. Are there any other questions? Doreen asks, is it appropriate to ask, how would you see us proceeding? So do you mean, Doreen, at the end of a sales call? So as a close to say, where do you see us going from here?
No response yet from Doreen.
Okay. Well, I'll jump in with my assumption then. I think it is sometimes. I think it is sometimes. Generally, you want to be engaged enough that you know what the next items are. You've kept track of them. But sometimes, you'll have a meeting where you'll connect with the employer. You guys will have a good discussion, but it'll bounce all over the place. And yeah, in those cases, I might say, all right, so what do you think the next steps are? It's obvious why I'm here. I would like you to hire some students. Otherwise, I'd be remiss in my duties. But if I'm not quite sure what their timelines are, what their expectations are, I might ask that. If I have to ask that, that probably tells me that I've missed something during my discovery. But if you think you've got a good rapport with the person, I don't see anything wrong with bringing that one forward. Kate's asked, what's a good site visit question? So, I think they're quite broad. We generally ask questions around, getting the student reflecting on their work term, getting the students reflecting on their relationship with their supervisor, getting feedback from the supervisor, and making sure that both are comfortable with their roles and responsibilities. So, one that supervisors tend to like is, I'll ask them, what do you wish someone had told you when you were at that student's point in your career? What did you learn the hard way that you want to pass on to them? They tend to like that, really that sort of question that brings them into the process. And I really think that's very important. My site visits, like I said, 2 ears, 1 mouth, I really don't want to be talking. I'm not on the job. I don't know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. I want to ask questions to get them thinking about it. So I might ask, the student, describe your job to me like you were interviewing with me. So start from scratch. Tell me what your job at PepsiCo is. And then I'll ask the supervisor, how well do you think they captured their job? Generally, the supervisor will have some feedback, and they'll point out some things that maybe the student didn't think of as important. So that's a good approach too, generally, is ask the student, ask the supervisor to elaborate. Or maybe ask the supervisor, what do you think so-and-so has been doing that's really effective and really, help them be successful? And then ask the student, are you aware that you're doing that? So really keeping a three-way conversation going and really trying to avoid reading questions off a list, I find goes a long way to making sure that the interaction is positive for everyone. Natasha, I'm going to jump over this one. If you don't think that my last kind of long answer addressed that, please feel free to ask it again. Natasha just asked another question about site visits. And Kate, yes, the supervisor and the student are present for the site visit questions. We do joint site visits, meaning we're either on a call or in a meeting with the student and the supervisor for first or second work terms or for new supervisors, so someone who's never supervised the Dow student before. We also give either party the opportunity to have a one-on-one if they'd like it. That's something we talk about when we set up. So, hey, I'm coming to meet you and your supervisor. If either of you have something that you'd like to talk to me about offline, maybe before the meeting, here's my number, just let me know. And then we can connect, and sometimes, if there's an issue, the student might want to talk about it and get a little more comfortable on how they should bring it up, or the supervisor might have something they're going to want to address with the student that they want to bring us in on. All right, Daniela, do you share your students' feedback about the company and position? What's working well? or do you recommend the student does that him or herself? Do you mean during the site visit? I'm going to operate assuming that you do. And yeah, when we're in the meeting, the student gives their feedback. We encourage them to give candid feedback. In most cases, if the student has an issue with the job, we hope they brought it up by that point because we're talking about the middle of the term. But if not, I think it's useful to bring it up in that meeting because in a lot of cases, the student might have an issue, but the issue might not be just purely about the job. It might have to do with the student's perception. Might have to do with a misalignment of expectations. But it might also have to do with something the supervisor's doing that they're not aware of. So if they have an issue, who's going to address it? It's not going to be us in most cases. We're not supervising them. So, generally we want the supervisor to know. Now, if it is something a little bit touchier, then that's something we talk about beforehand. Kate, asking what happens if there's a problem? What happens if the student is unhappy? Again, that's something, if there's an issue, then we deal with each issue individually. By keeping up communication, we want students and employers to work through their issues themselves, but if they think we need to be involved, we're there to facilitate. So if we find a problem, we deal with it. All right. We believe we're getting into overtime here. We're a little bit past 4 o'clock. So does anyone have any other questions? All right. Well, if that's that, then I'll thank everybody very much for your time. And again, if you have anything else or you want to talk anything more, please feel free to drop me a line. Thank you.